I'm going to start by launching website X5. In the first tutorial, we started by looking at the preferences in website X5, and we defined the location where our project is going to be saved. We also defined the web fonts that we wanted to include in our project. I'll click the Start button. In the second tutorial, we selected a blank template that we're going to work with as we develop our website. I'll start by double-clicking on the template to open it. After entering some general settings according to Step 1, we moved along into Step 2, Template. And here you can see the blank or empty template that we selected so that we can work from scratch and develop our own website. I'm going to come down to this next item, which is called Customization. It is ghosted, which is a little bit deceptive, especially if you're a new user, because you may not realize that this is actually something that you can click. But it is very important to click this because this is how we get into setting up many of the aspects of our website. So I'm going to click Customization. And in the last tutorial, we worked with resolutions and responsive design. We set up the breakpoints at 1300 pixels, 960 pixels, and 480 pixels for our responsive website. I'll click OK. When I click the Preview button, we'll see our website. This blank default template consists of a home page, as well as page 1, page 2, and page 3. You can see that there are a few placeholder elements on this page, but for the most part, there is no content. For example, the page background color is just white. The page itself is just white. There are no names for our pages. They're just called page 1, page 2, and page 3. So as we develop the website, we will be adding content as well as giving our pages titles. We'll go back to website X5. Before we continue working on the template structure, I'm going to show you some of the other tabs that are available on the left-hand side. The first one is the map. Double-click, and you can see here that the map consists of our 4 pages: the home page, page 1, page 2, and page 3. When I double-click on the home page, for example, we move into the next section, which is Step 4, Pages. Website X5 is not a what you see is what you get website development application. You can't just put images and text on a blank canvas and see how they will look on your web page. Instead, Website X5 is based on a model where you put images, text, and other website objects into cells. And the information in these cells is then translated into your web page. With some practice, however, you will easily understand the cell model, and with the help of these tutorials, you'll be producing great-looking, professional quality responsive websites. We're going to continue where we left off in the previous tutorial in Step 2. We're going to look at the template structure. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see the various breakpoints that we set up in the previous lesson. Let's go back to the 1300 pixel breakpoint and look at the various elements that we can address on the page. When I click in the center of the page, you can see that we're working with the page contents. The item here at the left-hand side changed when I clicked in this section. Watch closely as I click at the top of the page. This is the header background. If I click a little lower down, this is the page background. I click at the very bottom, we have the footer background. Just to the right, we have the footer. And once again in the middle, we have the page contents. I'm going to change the color of the background for page contents. When I click on this drop-down arrow, we see a number of colors that we can choose for our page content background. I'll choose this one. Now you see our gray color inside the page content area. I'll click to the left here, which is the page background, and select a different color. I'll go with a darker gray. The darker gray shows up here. Let's preview our changes. So we can see the page content area is now this pale gray, and the page background area is this darker gray. We still have our pages, page 1, page 2, page 3, and the home page. I'll close this. We can look at the other viewports as well. When I click on this viewport, we can see that none of the color changes that I made in the desktop viewport apply to this viewport. Nor do they apply to this viewport, and they don't apply to this viewport either. So all the changes we made apply to the desktop viewport only. We're going to come back to template structure again and again, but for now I'm going to close out of here by clicking OK. And then I'm going to go to our map and double click on the home page to open that up. In the next part of this tutorial, we're going to look at how to place objects such as images into these cells and how to adjust their layout. As I mentioned earlier, Website X5 is not a what you see is what you get program. Instead, you place objects into various cells, as we show here, and from that you are developing your web page. Many new users find it extremely frustrating understanding why certain objects or elements placed into these cells don't appear on the web page the way they expect them to appear. Let's demonstrate this by starting to put an image into the first cell. To do that, I come over to the right and take the image icon and place it into this first cell. Now there is no image there yet because we have to place a graphic into that cell. Let me show you the image that I will be putting into this cell. Come over to Photoshop. I've created this rather abstract image, which is exactly 300 pixels across and 300 pixels down, and consists of small squares which are 30 pixels by 30 pixels each. In Photoshop, I can go into Image, Image Size, and you can see that the image is exactly 300 by 300 pixels. Okay, this is the image we're going to bring into our web page. Minimize Photoshop. We have a placeholder for our image. I have a couple of ways that I can bring the image in. One is I can simply double click on this cell, and that opens up the file requester asking us where do we want to get the image. I'll click here into the folder icon, and I'm going to navigate into a folder called Graphics, where I have this 300 by 300 pixel checkerboard image. There it is. I'll click OK. And now we have some blue shading here indicating that we've placed our graphic into this cell. I'm going to press the delete key to delete this image and show you another way that we can bring it in. Once again, start with the image icon, drag it across, but instead of double clicking here, I'm going to click on the little icon at the top that says Content. It gets us to the same place. And once again, we'll click on our folder and click on our file. I'll click OK. And let's preview this and see how the image looks on the web page. This may not be exactly what you expected. So we see that there's a large amount of space to the left of the image and some space above the image. It's not where we might have expected it to appear, which would be, say, in the top left corner of the web page. And as I said before, this is the kind of frustration that new users experience when they cannot predict why a particular element on a web page appears where it does. Let's investigate this in more detail. When we look at this web page, it's divided into 4 squares. So each of these cells should be exactly 650 pixels, because we know that our website is 1300 pixels across. We made our website 1300 pixels across in the previous tutorial. I'll come down to the bottom of the screen and I'm going to right click on this little icon to see how big our cells are on this web page. We can click Set Column Width, and it shows that this cell is 645 pixels wide, and in fact both this cell and this cell are equal, so they're both 645 pixels. Well, that does not add up to 1300. Why is that? This is the kind of question you're going to have until we investigate deeper to find out what's happening behind the scenes in website X5. I'll click OK. We're going to come back to our template, back to customization, and we're going to look at the template structure again. I'll click in the middle to bring up the page contents. Now on the left-hand side, we see that by default, website X5 has placed margins on this page. And those margins are 5 pixels on the left-hand side, 5 pixels on the right-hand side, 5 pixels on the top, and 5 pixels on the bottom. Suppose I don't want that. Suppose I don't want any margins on our web page. What I'm going to do is I'm going to enter the number 0 instead of 5 at the top, and click over here to set the left, right, top, and bottom margins to 0. Now we'll click OK. Let's come back to our pages and look at the home page that we were working on a moment ago. When I come down to the bottom here and right click to set the column width, it is now 650 pixels, which is exactly what we would expect if we divide a 1300 pixel page into 2. But because of that left and right padding that was hidden inside the template structure, the dimensions of the cell were 645 pixels, not the anticipated 650 pixels. But we're okay now. Let me click OK. Then I'm going to click the preview button. It doesn't look much different. Why is that? Close this. Let's see what's going on in this cell. It's a little hard to tell because we simply have an image on a gray web page. When I click on Style next to the Content button, we can set up some various properties for this cell. For example, the color. I'm going to change the color of the cell to red. What does this do when I preview my page? Okay, now we see a red background for our cell, and we see our graphic sitting in the middle of this cell. Not exactly what we want. Let's explore this further. When I look at the style once again, we notice that there is some outer and inner margin settings that have been set up by default as well. So not only does Website X5 adjust margins in the template structure, it also adjusts them in the cells. Let's turn all of these margins to 0. Put a 0 in here. So the left, right, top, and bottom are 0. And that's called the outer margin. And then I'm going to click for the inner margin and set that to 0. Left, right, top, and bottom are 0 for the inner margin. I will be explaining to you shortly what the difference is between the inner margin and the outer margin. Let's preview this again. Okay, that's interesting. We got rid of that little space that existed at the top of this cell, and we also don't have any spacing at the bottom of the cell that we saw before in the previous arrangement. We're getting closer, but why isn't this graphic over on the left-hand side? Take a look. Notice we have an alignment option, and we have several ways of aligning our graphic. Top left, top right, center, and so on. Let's go with top left. And now I'm going to go ahead and preview again. Alas, we now have our graphic located exactly where we want it to be, in the top left corner of the web page, with no separation or padding at the top of the graphic, and no padding or separation on the left-hand side. We still have all this red because remember this cell is 650 pixels across, half the size of the web page, and it has a red background that we specified in the properties. What if I want this cell to be only 300 pixels across? I don't want to see any of this extra red on the web page. Well, come back to our pages. And remember this little icon we had at the bottom? I'm going to right click on it and set the column width to be exactly 300 pixels. Now it's only 300 pixels across. Let's preview our page. Perfect. Now we have a graphic positioned in the top left corner of the page without any separation at the top or on the left-hand side. I'll come back to Website X5. When you place a graphic into a cell, you also have to look at its cell style. It's because in this dialog box, we can control the position of the graphic precisely. We now have it specified for top left, and we have no outer margin and no inner margin. The graphic takes up the full cell, so we no longer see the red background. Let's look again. It's exactly what we want. I'm going to close this. So we can see now in Website X5, there are a number of parameters that influence the location of this graphic. Starting off with the object style, where we now have it in the top left, with an outer margin of 0 all around, and an inner margin of 0 all around. Furthermore, in the template structure itself, when I click on the page contents, we now see that the margins have been set to 0, and that also had an influence on the location of the graphic. So it does take some getting used to, but once you know where to look in the various dialog boxes in Website X5, you will be able to position your page elements exactly where you want them to be. Using our screen caliper tool, we can confirm that this graphic is exactly 300 pixels across on our web page. I'll position the caliper into place here. And you can see that this graphic is precisely 300 pixels across and 300 pixels tall. Let's go back to website X5 for a moment. Come back to our pages. And look at the cell style once again. Now, what is the difference between an outer margin and an inner margin? Let's find out. I'm going to come into the inner margin here first, and I'll just type in, let's say, 20 pixels for each of these margins. And now let's see how our page looks when we preview it. Okay, that's interesting. So now we see the red background that we have in our cell, and we see that the cell is still exactly 300 by 300 pixels. However, our graphic has been reduced in size somewhat, so it fits inside the cell. It's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's still 10 by 10 squares, but each of the squares is slightly smaller, and our graphic has been reduced in size somewhat because of the 20 pixel padding going around the perimeter of the cell. Close this. I'm going to set the inner margin to 0. So we have left, right, top, bottom of 0. And let's change the outer margin. I'm going to set that to 20. So now we have, for the outer margin, 20, 20, 20, and 20. Nothing for the inner margin. What happens when we preview our website now? Again, a different look. Our graphic no longer measures 300 pixels across. It has been squeezed to fit into the cell because of the 20 pixel padding, but the padding occurs from the outside in, which means we don't see the red border around our cell either. So the outer margin removes information from the outside of the cell to the middle, whereas the inner margin leaves the entire cell available but puts padding inside the cell, thereby revealing the red background that we have behind the image. Let's try one more variation. I'm going to set the left and right margins to 20 and the top and bottom to 0. And on the inner margin, I'm going to set the left and right to 0 and the top and bottom to 20. And we'll preview this. And there you see the effect. Inner margin here, and outer margin here and here. Very interesting. It will definitely take you some time to get used to the effect of changing the outer margin versus the inner margin, but now that you've seen it demonstrated, you have a better idea of why these settings are here and how they can be changed.